Hi, everybody, and welcome to Meeting the Moment. This was created by Columbia Votes and CAPE standing for Civic Activism, Participation, and Engagement here on campus. And it represents a shift in focus. During the fall semester, we were all about civic joy and the celebration of our civic power. And this semester, we're focused on civic action. What can we do in this moment? And it also represents, this whole event represents, an ongoing commitment at Columbia College Chicago to ensuring that we are all informed and we're all empowered to be positive change agents during challenging times. My name is Sharon Bloyd-Peshkin. I'm a professor here in the School of Communication and Culture. I'm also the faculty fellow for civic engagement and the creator and leader of Columbia Votes. And this event is sort of everywhere. We're here on campus, but it's also being live streamed into various classrooms, and it'll remain permanently on Columbia Votes YouTube channel. This is the fourth panel in a series of 4, and this one is about being a force for good. How do we protect the vulnerable, and how do we create communities of care? So our panelists, I'll go from my right, are Asha Ransby-Sporn, who is a community organizer and writer, Betty Alzamora, a board member of Indivisible Chicago Alliance, Katherine O'Brien from Logan Square Mutual Aid, and Matthew Eiler-Rillie, who is the coordinator of Education and Community Development for the Columbia College Office of Student Diversity and Inclusion. And our moderator in the middle is James Wieners, who is one of my voter registration geniuses. And with that, I will turn it over to James.
So thank you guys so much for joining us here today. I'm really thankful to have each of you on the panel, and I'm really happy that we get to end out our panels today by having something about a more positive spin on things, because it's great to talk about like what we can do for the community in terms of like all of the things that are happening right now, but it's even better to talk about the positive things, the positive changes that we can make. So if you guys wouldn't mind, I'd like to start with some introductions. We could start here and then just go down the line.
Well, thanks so much for having me. My name is Asha. Like you said, I'm an organizer and a writer. I was a co-founder of an organization called BYP 100, Black Youth Project 100, which was is an organization of young Black folks that came about after the murder of Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida, and really kind of emerged at the height of the movement for Black Lives as a political home for young Black folks like myself to organize in our communities. Since then I've worked on a number of different campaigns, local and national here in Chicago. I've been a part of organizing around treatment, not trauma. I helped run the referendum on Bring Chicago Home. I worked on our mayor's campaign. So a lot of different types of organizing, and I also write, and I'm a columnist for In These Times magazine.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Betty. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I am a community organizer, a board member with Indivisible Chicago Alliance, and also with Equality Illinois. So the commonality there is somewhat about what we're talking today. There's communities of care that we will, that we tend to serve through both of those organizations. My specific area of passion and joy is in the immigration space. As a first-generation American citizen and as somebody who also identifies as Latina and queer, these are the intersections that just bring me joy, to your point, and that I just focus a lot of energy on. So thank you again for having me here today.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Katherine O'Brien, she, her, and I'm here today to talk about Logan Square Mutual Aid and Chicagoland Food Sovereignty Coalition, which are mouthfuls. But I want to say in my intro that one thing that's really important for our groups is that we don't really have any hierarchical structure or speakers or leaders of the group necessarily. So I'm more here in my personal capacity to share about what it's like to just be a neighbor, helping out other neighbors in my neighborhood. And I've never been on a panel or anything, so I'm excited to be here with y'all and tell you a bit about our groups. We mostly focus on food rescue and redistribution in Chicago. And for me, I work in my neighborhood, but there's a ton of mutual aid groups all throughout Chicago working under this broader Chicago Food Sovereignty Coalition. And we, rescue food all week long and then redistribute it all throughout the city. Some of that is sited distros and some of it is bringing to people's doorsteps. We also have a free store. So there's a lot to talk about. Excited to get into it with y'all.
Love that. Hello. Matthew is my name. Maddie and Matt are both great. Any pronouns for myself. And I work here. I work in our Student Affairs Student Division and our Student Diversity and Inclusion office. We have the absolute joy of being the office that does a lot of our DEI work. We are Student Affairs, so we are the student-facing office, so we are often meeting folks from their first day of school, really talking about how we exist together as a creative school with all of our identities, everything that we exist together. How does that kind of go forward? I think for my own personal work, I've been organizer since about 2007, and I've lived here for the past 10 years. So a lot of my work locally has been either on the far north side up in the 48th Ward or the further south side down in the 6th Ward, which is where I live, doing a lot of like community work. And I think those two, really experiencing the work here in the past 8 years, but really thinking about how people come to meet each other's needs and the relationships that grow from that, the joy they find in that, but really particularly how young folks come to that work has really shaped a lot of how we approach DEI within our student affairs here. So I'm really thrilled to be here with you all.
Thank you all for that. So I want to start with you, Betty. You're a board member at Indivisible Chicago Alliance, but also involved in a lot of organizations that work to protect and defend vulnerable groups, including LGBTQ+, immigrants, people of color, and just generally people who are under attack by the current administration. So what can those who feel personally safer do to help those who are the most vulnerable right now?
Wow, that's an amazing question. I'll start off by speaking from the lens of Indivisible Chicago. And we have been organizing since 2017. We've done a lot of work around immigration spaces, but obviously in trying to meet this moment, we're doing a lot of work again in immigration, but also in the LGBTQ space as areas where we know, we know this current administration is laser focused on really doing the most amount of harm to vulnerable populations from within those groups. One of the things that we have done to help meet the moment is started to do the work to create, if you will, working groups or affinity groups from within the Indivisible structure, where we bring people who have expressed a passion or an interest for those particular areas, and we can start doing the work of organizing around this. So what does that look like from the lens of Indivisible Chicago? I'm not going to put a fine line on it. This is a predominantly white organization. So to your point, it is a community that if you, again, without putting a fine point on it, it will be safer than some of the more vulnerable people, like those that are here without papers, that are undocumented, those that identify as trans. So what we try to do first and foremost is have a conversation about what it means to be an ally. And that's an important conversation to have. You basically try to become somebody that is educated in support of an impacted community. But you're not there to tell people what they're meant to do, because they are the ones that are directly impacted. So first and foremost is that recognition of who is really the community that is impacted, and so that you can learn from them what they identify to be the needs that their community has. So I'll use immigration as an example. We, both from the lens of Indivisible Chicago and then other hats that I wear with other community-led efforts, have been focused a lot around rapid response. And so what that means is becoming somebody that is very well informed, as best as I can be, by having gone through seminars for Know Your Rights, for instance. Learning as much as you can. You can never know enough about Know Your Rights. And even though I can say I'm thankfully and happily trained by organizations like ICER, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, I've gone through train-the-trainers with them this weekend. I'm also really, really grateful that I'll be going through training with OCAD, the Organized Communities Against Deportation, so that I can become a trainer for ICE Watch or Migra Watch. And the point here is that what we try to do as allies is disseminate correct and viable information that we then can use in defense of these communities. Why that matters, I'm sure you've all heard, all of the raids that have been announced, the raids that are happening, and the raids that will come. The more that we ourselves know how to defend our rights, but more importantly, how to defend the rights of those that are under attack, the better we'll be able to push back against the current administration's agenda of hate and agenda of deportation and getting rid of people. So that would be one of the examples that I would say is, look for the opportunities with organizations that are helping to disseminate good, solid, practical information around how to defend rights. That's in the immigration space. The other hat I wear, as I mentioned earlier, at Equality Illinois, we work in partnership with a lot of fantastic community-led organizations. I'm thinking of organizations like Task Force or Brave Space Alliance and others that organize around the communities and the needs of vulnerable populations. So in particular, trans communities, all of these organizations are always looking for volunteers to be able to form part of mutual aid efforts, form part of advocacy. And all it really requires for us as allies is to become informed and to open our hearts up to listen to what all these organizations have to say, and then find the time, the space, and the grace to plug yourself in there to learn more about what they do. So I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but hopefully that just kind of gives you a sense of a couple of things that we can do as allies in the fight.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to jump on that as well about being an ally and what you have done or what you would recommend others to do, love to hear it from many of you as well.
Yeah, I think that was beautifully said. And knowing the work that your work does is wonderful. I think for what we start to talk about, particularly with students here when they arrive, is a lot of this work takes a relationship. And I think we are socialized in America, particularly, that identities with more privilege know the best, and identities without as much privilege, do not know. So I think sometimes allyship can slip into the let me do this for you, so that, I definitely know the right way. The tactics are the best. Let me do this, I got this. But that's often, that's not the needs often of the communities that is either our own or ones we want to be in allyship with. I think that takes a very practiced relationship that isn't easy at times, but it is kind of what we say is the work, is having the right relationship with the folks that we want to be able to do this type of work together. I think that helps our movements grow and not so dependent on just a small group, one identity, everything like that. I think what I've been really excited about, particularly with how these talks have been framed, is that there's intentionality of space for joy. And I think a lot of times in our work, if there's a group that can come and help do the behind the scenes work so that the board who runs a lot of the core work can go out and have a dance night or go out and rest or do things like that, that's still a part of the work. But I think knowing that, you have to come in trusting the folks doing this work that they will speak about their needs, and if that doesn't match what your thoughts are, okay, be willing to shift it.
And then Katherine, I wanted to ask you about Logan Square Mutual Aid. So you guys really emphasize mutual aid over charity. That it's about more than just giving, it's about creating and fostering a community that is able to lift each other up. So what are some mutual aid tactics that students can practice both here on campus and then bring home with them?
Yeah, I think mutual aid is it can be such an expansive concept, and I'm sure many of you are probably even more informed on mutual aid than I was a couple years ago. But like, mutual aid is about this sense of relationship and community building. So you can practice mutual aid in your life with your neighbors by getting to know them, introducing yourself to them, sharing leftover food, like, you know, doing a little chore for your neighbor who's not as able-bodied as you are. Things like that are really easy ways, and it sounds like, okay, that's just being a good person. Yeah, basically, yeah, it's just getting back to that sense of we are a community. Like, we might live in this big city, we might not come from the city, or we might be annoyed because we do come from the city and there's a lot of people here who don't. Like, but we need to build something together. And mutual aid, one of the key tenets is just like acting now. We're not waiting for conditions to change. We're not hoping things are gonna get better. I mean, we are, but like, we're not relying on that. We're addressing the core problem right now. For us, that's mostly food, and that's what we have the capacity to address, although there are other like avenues of mutual aid that we've pursued more and want to get back to. But yeah, people are hungry right now. There's a ton of food waste in America. How can we rescue that food, get it to people who need it, and build relationships in our neighborhoods? Yeah, and like, I think the key between mutual aid versus charity is like, charity and even nonprofit work, a lot of times you have major donors and funders who are kind of setting the agenda and deciding what their money is used for in very particular ways, setting up barriers to access, like you need an ID to come to this food bank, you need to be in this category to access this resource. And mutual aid is about trusting individuals, trusting people's needs, and lowering barriers to access so that it is not this, we're giving you this, which is charity. It's, hey, this exists, it needs to be used, and we need to find a way to use it. Like, so, yeah, that's my short answer, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to jump on the question as well, for any of these questions, but specifically about mutual aid at all.
Well, can I just, so we love talking about it, and I loved how you said that. So the RAC is one of our resources here. The fashion department runs it, has done a wonderful job, but it's our free store. The RAC started within our office back in 2018 and then formed into the permanent store that it is right now. And a lot of these like tenets of mutual aid was really what we tried to build into the fabric of it. And the feedback that I think we first got of one of the fears is, you know, students are gonna come in and take it all. They're gonna come in and like, what if you put stuff out and it's just gone? Which, okay, great, fine. And that was not the problem. In fact, what we saw first is people donated quite a bit, and the messages that we kept receiving was like, someone needs this more. I don't know if my need is high enough to even come here. I don't know what's gonna happen if I fill out, do I have to fill out a form, and where does it go next? There was just so much socialized, I think, distrust of like both naming your own needs and what will happen if your needs are met, is there some catch? And I think when we said, this is not a handout, this is not a charity, this is an acknowledgement that the systems that we live in create barriers to meeting our needs. And by you being here, we trust that you belong here, and we trust that you shopping here is in itself like a radical act. You taking this thing for free that like a stranger brought to you is a radical thing. Once we started going from that, it was that I think helped form what we mean when we say we have collective needs. This shirt may have come from someone that you don't know. You may find out it came from somebody who you actually don't like at all, but great, this still served your need. I think that way was a little bit of a shift for both like how curriculum talks about need, but also how I think broader institutions approach, concerns or fears or things like that. So I love that we live in like a city that has so many wonderful mutual aid works and really talk about it in a really beautiful, deep way. So thank you for your work. It's wonderful. Yeah.
And then I was wondering if you could explain to people who don't understand what food sovereignty means. What does that exactly entail?
Yeah, I think that food sovereignty is an indigenous concept, so I, as a white person, I'm not an expert in it, but food sovereignty, there's a lot of orgs that use that, and mutual aid orgs that use that word to talk about the reclamation of food. So obviously, if you are an indigenous person living on a land in pre-colonial times, you had more access to foods that were culturally relevant to you, foods that you enjoyed cooking, foods that you had control over the system of cooking, distributing, or not cooking, growing, distributing, cooking, sharing with your community, versus now where we have an incredibly corporatized system of food production, which none of us have control over. And if there's not many people who have a self-sustaining garden in their backyard and can live off of that. So food sovereignty is an attempt to get back closer to reclaiming that means of production. So Chicagoland Food Sovereignty Coalition is like, that's what we're aiming for, but at the same time, it's not indigenous run, it's not a farm that we're growing stuff on, it's not necessarily, like, I wouldn't say it's one-to-one with the original concept of food sovereignty, but the idea is we're trying to create independence within our communities and the ability for people to access food outside of the systems that are keeping them from being able to afford food. So being able to access free food, being able to have someone deliver food to your house if you need that, is a way of building sovereignty among our community. Yeah.
Thank you. And then, Asha, I wanted to ask you, I was reading an article that you had written, I believe in 2023, reflecting back on a decade of being in Black-led movements. And you mentioned that even when you're fighting for the same cause or you have the same goal, there can be differing points of view. And that being in all these different groups has taught you to communicate your viewpoint in a respectful way. And so I'm curious, what are some strategies of respectful communication when we are trying to work together and not encounter these divisions?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I've organized in a lot of different contexts with young people and older people and in multiracial coalitions and across class and all that. I see it as my responsibility as an organizer, and I would extend that, beyond just people who do organizing work, but, if you feel like you're on the side of seeing a better, more equitable society, then I see it as our responsibility to bring more people along with us on that journey. And that inherently means talking to and being able to win over people that might not be there yet. We all live and grow up and go through the education system and consume mass media that shapes us based on the way that the world is. And if you have some idea of wanting it to be better and different and not have billionaires control our government while, so many people lack housing and healthcare and all the basic things that everybody deserves, then, you know, there was probably some experience that got you there, or something that you read, or some person that you talked to. So I really see that as like the heart of what organizing is about. And even if you're not organizing, you know, if you have some view of how things could be different, I think it's like on all of us to be open to having those conversations and convincing other people. And I think that I've experienced a lot of culture in kind of movement spaces where people come in and, you know, I think like social media culture has really incentivized this. Like there's this desire to be right, or to be like the most radical, or like smarter than everybody else, and to critique anything that is like problematic. And, you know, yes, we should critique the world as is. We should mostly be critiquing like the powers that be and the systems that we live under that, you know, that are racist, that create so much inequality in our society. And then when we're like in the room with people, we should have or even if we're just, you know, if you're communicating out through media or however you're communicating with people, I think it's important that we have a tone that is less about shaming people for what they, you know, may be conditioned to believe, because we all, you know, exist and move through a world that is white supremacist and capitalist and individualist and all of that. Like, it's not about shaming people for, you know, whatever beliefs they may have, but being convincing enough to win people over to something else. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say about that. And yeah, I think to that end, in the moment that we're in politically, like, you know, I kind of can't understate how big a deal I think it is that, you know, like the Elon Musks of the world are, you know, taking over the machinations of government. You know, I think it's going to result in a huge amount of inequity, like millions of people just in Illinois that rely on something like Medicaid or SNAP benefits that are being like pulled out from under people. And that's not to say that things were perfect under Joe Biden or the, like, you know, neoliberal status quo of the Democratic or the Republican Party. But I do think what we're seeing in this moment is a shift. And yeah, we should all be looking for ways to get behind demands for how things can be different if we want to see a shift back in a different direction. And yeah, if we're seeing some of kind of like the dismantling of the parts of government that do public good, that do redistribute and provide some of the things that we need and rely on, like public schools and healthcare subsidies and housing, you know, we should be demanding like not just things about how we treat each other on an interpersonal level, but like big structural things that can be different. And to the conversation around mutual aid, I think that's a great strategy and tactic for how we can be supporting the material needs that people have in the meantime. But I do think it's important that we're always then connecting that to big demands on systems for how we need things to be different if we want to really have an impact at that scale, because the scale of the problem is really, really big, and we need kind of like systemic change to get at it.
Thank you for that answer, truly. And if anyone wants to add in anything about effective communication, especially, I really like your point that you made about like being respectful and not necessarily trying to be the loudest or most correct voice in the room, but just trying to listen and really get your point across.
I think earlier today, in one of the earlier panels, we talked about the role of protest and art in this moment, in helping to meet this moment. And it reminds me so much of what you just said about, you know, creating the spaces and the places for people to be able to share their perspective and be able to go out and forcefully communicate these messages in ways that are understandable to so many of us. So, you know, we are creating a space this Saturday to protest. You know, we're calling our protest Take Down Tesla, Tyranny, Trump. And the point being is that we open the space for anyone who wants to come, because there are some fundamental things that are happening that Asha just mentioned. So, you know, $880 billion of a tax cut to Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP benefits being thrown out the window because an unelected billionaire wants to take over the government, and in so doing leave, he's going to rob all of us in order for him and his pals to become richer. And if we don't create the spaces for all of us to say, you know what, this is wrong, this is not, I don't want my family to be scammed or screwed or whatever, and I need to actually make the space to go out and join with other people collectively to voice just my absolute dissent, then that's the kind of thing that we should all be doing. And that's, it's not to say that protest is for everyone, because there's many introverts among us that really hate the idea of going out to the streets, but for those of you that can, join us at Water Tower Park on Saturday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so many opportunities like that. We are one of like a growing multitude of protest voices that are out in the city now, that are just joining together in community. And maybe we don't always agree about the tactics, or maybe some of the messages aren't quite 100%, but I think the message is that if we listen to each other and we give ourselves space and grace, and we understand that we don't always have to agree 100% all the time, but the fundamentals are there. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, and go out there. I think somebody said it earlier, like we can all try to do our best, and sometimes our actions are imperfect, but we're all trying. And I always think of my favorite abolitionist, Mariam Kava. That's what she's basically saying these days, is just go out there and try doing something. But do it in joy and in community, because that's how we're gonna, win our liberation together. So I think these questions are just incredibly powerful, and I'm loving the answers, so I'm gonna just shut up.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that, especially your quote at the end there. That was really powerful as well. So Matthew, a question for you. And unfortunately, keeping on the topic of Trump and everything that's going on right now, so the Office of Student Diversity and Inclusion continues to stand up for DEI at Columbia College, Chicago, despite the federal dismantling of programs elsewhere. For Columbia College students worried about the future and looking to make some positive change, what are some opportunities that Columbia students can take advantage of to connect to our community here, both on campus and off?
Yeah, I love that. I think I'll say we are taking, and I hope students feel this, but we are taking very seriously like the moment of what the threats are, what the climate is, everything that's kind of been out there. I think we have tried to do, and I think this is where acknowledging that information being kind of coming at you in a floodgate has been very purposeful, and I think it's very easy to feel like, well, we're screwed. And I think offering some sort of truth behind both our approach, our stance, and kind of where we're thinking in, staring fear in the face and saying, you know what, this is our plan if the worst kind of comes to. I think for us, as like a private school in a state that really stands behind the type of work that we do find peace within that. I think like our office name as of right now is staying the same. The roles that we do, we are very explicit with the type of roles that we do here and the type of work that we want to see. And we take very seriously, the responsibility to have, the types of systems in place for students to be able to be at our school. I think for students who want to be a part of this work, I think to name, they already are. I mean, we do this work because we know that students want this type of work. We know that students want work that is for queer and trans folks, that is actively anti-racist work, is actively challenging systems of power any way that it can. We know our work comes from the direct demands of what students want. And I think a lot of the work that we're very proud of is because students have been able to create the asks of offices and staff like us. I think what you can do and what we can do is if there comes a time, right? If there comes a time where our work needs to change its name, or our work needs to be more creative in the approach. The work itself, what we have embedded into the fabric of who we are and what we expect from each other, that will not go away. We have intentionally so embedded our work into who we are as a school that this is the work that we demand and want to be able to see. And I also think for us, conversations that we have had is we take accountability to our work very seriously. Last year at this time, when these very specific conversations hadn't started yet around Trump, around the threats that are being made right now, we had changes that we still need to make. We have some deep work to do as a school that has very deep DEI values, but still how that lives out for some of our students here, the work never ends. And we do not want the bar for our work to go down. If I think nationally we're seeing just the mere presence of offices like ours, missions like ours, names like ours, those are seen as kind of a radical act right now. And I do think it's important to recognize what led to the protections of offices like ours when you see colleges having them drop left and right now. But we don't want our mere presence and existence to be the marker of success alone. Our students deserve active DEI work here, active inclusion work, and that a year ago that needed to continue to grow. We've done a lot of work, we're very proud of it, but I think that need to continue to grow is very much heightened right now. So I think among this, we're going to have some very intentional talks among colleagues, around faculty and staff, around student to student, about how do you remain accountable to what we believe this work really is when the work itself is being attacked. But those are the type of things that we really want to make space for. Yeah.
And then I have a couple of questions that are for everyone, so feel free if you have something to add just to jump in onto this. So for a lot of students here at Columbia, we just had a panel talking about protests, but this may be their first time attending a protest of any kind. So if you guys have any advice, what advice would you give someone going to their very first protest?
Go.
Did you say go?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good advice.
That's probably good advice.
Could be more specific, but it's too late. Get out there. It's fun.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think go with someone. Be willing to be organized. Be willing to sign in on the sign-in sheet and get a call from an organizer to be a part of something after. Yeah, I think that now is a great time to get involved, and protesting is oftentimes the thing that we see that is visible, and it's a super important way of taking action. And there's so many others that are equally important. And I would say, also be willing to be a part of something that involves talking to other people. Join an organization where you've got to work with others. Bring a friend with you. Get involved in a campaign where maybe you're going to go knock some doors or make some phone calls or send some text messages. There's 3,000 billionaires in the world and a billion, several billion of the rest of us. And so our power really is in numbers and people and how many of us we can connect all together. So every time one of us takes action, that's some power. And every time one of us is willing to pull more people in with us, that's even more.
So we have a saying at Indivisible Chicago, it is always a beautiful day for a protest. And so I would agree with what everybody here is saying, go. But always just remind yourself why we try to get people to attend protests. It is one of the most powerful ways to build community. It is one of the most powerful tools that history time and again has proven to have taken down tyrants and dictators and authoritarian regimes. And there is such power in, even if it's for your first time, being part of something that is so full of energy that because people show up, and there's going to be a lot of people out there that might not have done this before, So we all bring our nervous energy together, and next thing you know, you're building community. And that is so incredibly powerful. It's so incredibly important to feel like you're part of something that is so much bigger than us as one, but to be part of something that is the whole. And it can be messy, it can be imperfect, but it is so worth it, because the moment you start looking around in the crowd and you see one person to your left, one to your right, one in front and behind, courage is incredibly contagious. And these protests, I'll go back to the Tesla example. 2 weeks ago, we were doing a protest out in front of Eiler-Rillie on behalf of trans minor kids whose care at the hospital was being paused. You know, gender-affirming care. And I was there as a safety marshal, and I was there with a ton of friends. And one friend in particular, very dear friend of mine, he's a photographer. And he was going to various different protest actions throughout the day. So he was with us in the morning at Eiler-Rillie, and then he wandered up the street because he had heard about one young person who was going to be in front of the Gold Coast Tesla dealership. This was somebody who had put a random social media post saying, I got to do something, I got to go and just kind of like manifest my displeasure, my outrage at Elon Musk and what he's doing. And so I'm going to take my sign, I'm going to go in front of the dealership, and I'm going to say it. And so Paul, my friend, the photographer, went out immediately after our protest to see if this person was out there. And sure enough, they were. And they were there on their own, but Paul said two things. One, that he was just amazed in the most positive way, because here was this young person standing up with a sign, basically, you know, on one side, honk if you hate Elon, or felon, or whatever it was, and the other side, it's, you know, just another message expressing outrage. And that was really cool. I mean, just the power of even one person. Everything can start. You remember the butterfly and the wings, you know? All it takes is one flap of a wing. Next thing you know is a typhoon somewhere like on the other side of the planet. And that's what it felt like to him. That was number one. Number two was, it was one person. And there was an array of 6 cops on one side of the street and 3 bike cops on the other. Because that's how terrified authority can be when we're all. Now imagine, you know, like when you grow the movement, when you grow more people, you're probably going to get people that are going to try to terrify and intimidate you. And I guess what all I would say to that is that when we do it together, it doesn't mean that the risks go away, right? It just means that we can mitigate, because we're going to take care. Who takes care of us? We take care of us. So yeah, I mean, every day is a beautiful day for a protest. And if you've never done it, you know, we're meeting up tomorrow at midday. We're standing up with, you know, a lot of science professors and people that work in the sciences for a rally in Federal Plaza at noon called Stand Up for Science. And the next day we're doing our Tesla protest. And we'll continue, you know, just come find us at indivisiblechicago.com, because to the extent that we can raise the voices of people that are doing protest and we ourselves can attend, we will. And this is how you find out about the things that are, some of the things that we hear are going on. Also, it's fun. I think you said that too, right? Protest can be fun. So yeah.
I think I'll just add, these are not uncommon questions we've gotten over the past many years, being in like DEI at a very creative, like passionate school like this. I think there's like some tactical things that I really appreciate being heard, like specifically recognizing that a lot of protests are actions that have been planned. The tactics, the marshals, like a safety vest, water, you know, the frequency of the Q&As of the space that you were in, it's really good to know. So to be able to look those up beforehand are very, I think, necessary to do. But I think also, I appreciate hearing this, but having your own relationship to risk right now, I think is just really important work that especially folks as students can practice doing. I think I don't want to take casually the risk of arrest or police, and And I think knowing how that impacts potentially like a scholarship or things like that, just being able to know what safety measures you need to take, I think is part of that analysis of risk, and then being able to speak that out with folks, I think can really offer you some either truth or peace or a more, a choice that feels much more like your own about entering the type of work that you want to do. And also just, I'll name, it's been said, but really to focus on, if you come to the moment right now that specifically, things like a protest are not for you, either right now or ever, that there's no feelings attached to that. You're not a bad organizer or a bad person who cares about the world because that's not the right tactic for you. There's a lot of needs that are attached to it. And I think especially at a school like ours, you look at successful movements and they've had, posters being made, poetry being written around that, art forms and songs and plays have really been able to speak to the work that they saw in more diverse, different types of ways. Your gifts attached to the type of work, I think they need to be talked with the folks who are as collective, but you have, whether this exact thing is right for you or not, you have a lot to offer this type of work. And I think being able to put it in there is something that we really encourage you to think about.
I think that's a great thing to remember, is that we all have something to give, even if it's not attending protests. We all have something that we can do.
Yeah.
I'll just say one last thing, which is also know what you're protesting for. Do your research and what the demands are and what it's about. And people protest for all kind of things. People protest for all kinds of horrible causes. People on the right protest. They have their own movement too. Yeah. And I think get out there, protest against billionaires and Elon Musk and capitalist greed and over-policing and those things. I think that's a good part of attending and participating in anything. You don't have to know every single thing about something, but do your research and know what you're showing up for.
Yeah.
I just have one last question to ask you guys, and then I think we're going to open it up so that anybody on the floor can ask questions. So we've talked a lot about community, but in order to create community, we need to be able to communicate and listen. So this kind of branches off of the question that I asked you earlier. But what are some ways to get the ball rolling in these sometimes sensitive conversations surrounding politics?
To build community, you mean?
To build community, or just start conversations.
I think it's not a conversation starter, but what's happening is the conversation, and that leads into really rich or unexpected conversations. And there's always, at least in mutual aid, it's really based in collective decision making and having a lot of conversation about things. So that can make things a little slower, but it's also really important. And I think including everyone, not just including, people who volunteer at the free store, trying to make it a real community space where people that are served and people that are serving there are having an open dialogue about whatever the issue may be, is important. So I think a good way to start conversations is an open invite and an open call that your opinion matters and we want to hear from everyone in the group.
I think we're in this moment where there's kind of information overload that can be very overwhelming, and that's based on the nature of media in this day and age, and it's also based on the political reality. Every day something wildly horrible is happening. And so I think a lot of people are dealing with either overwhelm and feeling like they need to read every single thing in a way that maybe you're not even processing, or going down the rabbit hole of feeling really apathetic, or just tuning it out. And I think we should all have some strategies to be able to stay informed and follow what's going on, have like some type of framework for filtering that, but then also like grounding ourselves and being in conversation about what it all means with people that we know and trust. So I think it all kind of starts with like, where are you getting information, and then how are we using conversations to make sense of that with other people. And yeah, I think having like trusted places that you get some of that information and some of that analysis of what's going on politically is really important. I just locally, you know, I mentioned In These Times magazine, which I write for, and is just like a good source of a kind of just a more left and kind of people-centered perspective on what's going on from all different kinds of issues. So that's one resource. The Tribe, also in Chicago, is like a really great resource for following local issues. So having your source of information, and then I think like, you know, using those things as jumping off points to engage other people that maybe are also experiencing some of that like overwhelm or disengagement or whatever strategy they have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you both more about that. And I'd say, you know, as you become informed and you look for trusted resources, like these are two of my go-to resources as
Great.
well. And certainly in the immigration space, I love the magazine Borderless.
Yeah.
And why these resources matter to me is, as you mentioned, they are people focused. One of the things that I would encourage all of us to do is to open ourselves to listen to the stories that people tell you. Now more than ever, we're going to have to invite our neighbors to have the conversations about their stories, because now more than ever, we're going to start hearing about the damages of this administration with the actions that are going to come. And so what I mean to say by that is we don't necessarily have to approach these conversations from the what is your take on this political action, but it could also be, you can instead look at it as the opportunity of, well, I've just lost my job, my parents' Social Security check didn't make it, it's probably not going to get here for 3 more months, and I can't buy my grandfather his insulin. And you allow people to tell the story, and you'll soon enough realize it's being told from the political context. And therein is the opportunity to meet the moment where you can share, well, how do you understand that to be the case? And I think what we're going to find is we're starting to see it. I mean, there are some media outlets reporting it, that there are people that voted for the opposition's ticket that now have buyer's remorse. Today, for the first time, the current president's approval rating has actually gone underwater. And what that means is that the rating is now, the disapproval rating is higher than the approval rating. It's a gap of, I think, 0.3%. That's important, because when he took office, there was, you know, he had a positive rating. Now he's underwater. Congratulations, it took him 5 weeks to get there. Mm-hmm. And it's just going to continue to go down. And why does that matter? It's all these things that we've been talking about, whether it's conversations with our neighbors, whether it's making noise on the streets through protest, whether it's using your universe-given talents to communicate as communicators, the stories that matter about this moment. This is going to be really powerful, but sadly, I think we all recognize that there's going to be a lot of pain in the process too. Yeah. Stories matter. I think that's my whole point. That was a long-winded way of saying let's listen to each other. Let's listen to the stories.
Yeah, I think a good marker right now is just asking a person you meet, like, how are you doing? And if their answer is, oh, everything's great, well, that's probably my answer. I think, with community building, I think especially for students, right? It can feel nuanced with what your end goal is. And I think especially when we talk, we're talking a lot about the work of justice, DEI, anything you would call it. I think for that, my bar is a little bit different than when I'm looking for community, but what I mean is friendship. It means people that I want to be close relationship, close bar with. And I think for students, I want to just acknowledge that, because you really deserve both. And I think my metric shifts a bit, right? Like when I'm looking for folks to bring into friendship or beyond, you know, there's a different level of what I think we expect, or a closer alignment of things than if we're kind of tactically aligning in like getting our needs met. I think practicing, I can deal with a lot more difference within that than that, and I think nuancing the two is worth it.
Alrighty, so I think we're going to throw it out to questions from the audience now. If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand.
We only have time for one or two, max. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What was the people using director?
In These Times magazine.
And I'll throw it out there, I subscribe to it, and we keep the current copy every time in 618. So 618, 4th floor is our office. Come on by and read it. We just made like a really beautiful, cozy lounge, a really great space to read about justice in the world. But
In these
we have
times.
those, yeah.
Yeah.
In these times.
And it's obviously online too.
Yeah,
There's
online.
like social
Yes,
media,
yes,
and
yes.
they have a newsletter and everything.
Yeah.
But support a book or a magazine. Get off the phones and read it in person.
Yes, in our cozy lounge.
With the Chicagoland Free Store and everything, how could we get involved?
Yeah, so I would say, long story short, go to chicagolandfoodsovereignty.com. You can fill out the volunteer form. And a lot of it is car-based work. A lot of it is food rescue that you need a car for. And we have a free store on the north side. On the south side in Pilsen, there's Urban Canopy. It's a business called that, but we have a warehouse there. And they do like food sorting and organizing on Thursday nights. So there's a couple different ways, but if you fill out the volunteer form, then we'll connect you with whatever neighborhood you live in and the mutual aid group there. So that's probably the best way for y'all. And then another thing to be aware of is just love fridges in Chicago. If you ever have or encounter extra food that's not, a huge volume, look up Love Fridge Chicago, and there's fridges all throughout the city where you can drop off that food.
Thank you all. First of all, just a round of applause for our panel. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found it valuable. And as we all process this moment and figure out what roles we want to play and what things we want to do, before we break, I want to tell you about two opportunities. The first is Columbia Votes is sponsoring a student-organized, student-run book club called BRANCH, which stands for Bringing Real Action and Nurturing Civic Hope. This is a new book club. If you're interested in joining it, just email me at vote@colum.edu, and I will connect you with the organizers. So that's one thing. We're also launching a new minor in media activism. You can look that up online. If you have questions, you can ask my colleague Yanti Friesum, or again, if you can't figure out any other way to find out about it, email me at vote@colum.edu, and I'll get you connected with that. And the last thing is just please stay, have some refreshments, have some conversation. It's great to debrief a panel like this with people who've likewise been involved in it. So I welcome you to stay and have some refreshments and conversation. And thank you.